Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes webcast. This is sports editor Joe Waljasper along with Tribune football beat writer Dave Matter. Dave, a bye week for Missouri. This week they face Colorado. Kind of maybe one of the storylines going into this is Aldon Smith, who had suffered a broken leg against San Diego State's not going to be back for this. Plus, right. Missouri also loses Jimmy Burge, one of their really the only backup defensive tackle they've been playing, to an alcohol arrest. So they're a little thin. What effect do you see that having on Saturday's game?
Well, Colorado's a team that likes to run the ball. This year they've run the ball 62% of the time from scrimmage. So you figure this would be a good game to have some depth along the defensive line, especially inside, and Missouri really doesn't. So they're going to have to play some untested guys inside. That is, unless they just want to keep the two starters, Rosano and Hamilton, out there all the time, and I don't think they do. So I think Brendan Donaldson maybe play a little bit more, George White, just to give those guys a breather up front. And then along the edge at defensive end, a position we've thought all along Missouri has some good depth at. But this is a Colorado team they've gotten really good pressure on in years past. And in their 4 wins under Dan Hawkins during his run at Colorado, Missouri's 4 wins, they've sacked the quarterback 19 times. So they've gotten pressure against this offensive line in the past historically. I think you might see them bring pressure from other areas, though. Last year when they beat Colorado, they blitzed all over the place, brought cornerbacks in, linebackers and safeties. So they might have to get a little creative to create some pressure when they're missing some of their better players up front.
I don't know if it's worth doing, but I mean, they do have 5 pretty good linebackers that, assuming they're all healthy this game, they've got Lambert, Ebner, Gatchkar, Xavier Gooden, and Andrew Wilson. If you wanted in a pass rush situation, you could use one of those guys. But I don't know how much you want to tweak your whole defense just to one game.
It's kind of hard to do on short notice too. So I don't know if they'll change a whole lot. They'll probably just rotate more guys in there that haven't played a lot this year, and that's asking a lot when now that it's conference play. In
a larger sense, this has been obviously 2 months of very bad off the field behavior from Missouri. Do you see this as a sign of an overall discipline problem with this team, or a commitment problem with this team, or more coincidence?
Well, you can look at these as a lot of isolated incidents, and outside of Derek Washington, they've all been misdemeanors. But I think DWIs, though, are a serious offense, even though they are misdemeanors. And I think at some point you got to add all these up and make the point that there is some discipline problem here. And whatever measures Gary Pinkel and his staff are taking to discipline these kids, it's not really sinking in, because you've got another arrest over the weekend, and there's been some other rules violators, the kids that aren't getting in trouble with the law but are getting in trouble with breaking their own team rules. So something's not right. Something's amiss with this group, a program that has the reputation for not having a lot of stories like this, a lot of off-the-field issues. There's a popular blog, the Fulmer Cup, which tracks off-field arrests for college football programs. It's a very tongue-in-cheek thing that's made to be funny, but there is some truth behind it. In Missouri, they ended their standings here in September, and Missouri finished second to Georgia because they had the most arrests, or they add up points, kind of give some measure to who's had the most issues, and Missouri's second right there. So, it is kind of a humorous website, but still, at some point, you're getting a lot of negative attention here, and it doesn't seem like the message is sinking into all the players.
Yeah, they've had 4 drinking and driving related arrests, including a coach, since August. I think if you say, is there a discipline problem? There's a discipline problem if you're missing players you need because they're suspended. I mean, they could use Derek Washington. They could use this week. I mean, Jimmy Burge isn't a great contributor, but they need him this week. I think there is a problem. I think it would probably behoove Gary Pinkel. I know he likes to handle these things internally and use the same kind of structure he's always used, but to at least come out and get out in front of it a little bit and say, look, I'm embarrassed that this keeps coming up. Even a couple happen in the offseason, but the fact they keep happening during the season, when you would think the players would be sort of tuned in to what's going on and football would be important to them. I don't think you can see this as anything but kind of a bad sign of the leadership of this team.
Yeah, and it's maybe it's something to do with this is the 10th year for Gary Pinkel and his staff. You wonder if kids are just not afraid of the consequences. Do they just feel like things are a little bit relaxed over there? I don't think they are, just from our vantage point. But inside that locker room, you never really know what's going on.
All right, Colorado enters at 3-1, obviously off to a better start than they've been in quite a while. Just your thoughts, is this a different Colorado team than the one Missouri's just beaten up on the last 3 or 4 years?
The word I've been using when I watch Colorado and just look at their numbers, they seem more competent offensively. You know, they've had this bungled quarterback rotation the last couple of years where they've just gotten nothing done with whatever quarterback they bring in there. They've settled on Tyler Hansen. He hasn't been great by any means, but he's a lot better than he has been in the past, and obviously a lot better than what Cody Hawkins gave that offense the last couple of years. And I think their offensive line has gotten better. They're not getting overwhelmed. They're not giving up a huge number of sacks. They're kind of finding an identity with their running game. So it's not the most talented team in the Big 12 North by any means, but they just seem to be a little more competent. They beat Hawaii by 18 points, I believe. They beat a bad Georgia team, but they still beat them, and that says something. I mean, you don't just luck into a win over a traditionally good SEC team. So they're better than they have been, but they haven't been very good for a long time since Dan Hawkins has been there. So I don't know if Missouri crushes them like they have been the last couple of years, last 4 years. But being at home, I would expect Missouri still to win this game.
There seems to be this year kind of a jumble of teams between number 3 and maybe number 12 in the Big 12. I think Oklahoma and Nebraska, most people would agree, are the top 2. Who do you see amongst that big pile of teams is the third best?
Right now I'd have to say Oklahoma State, just because I think they have probably the best win out of the other 4 or 5 candidates, beating Texas A&M. And Texas A&M, I think, is a flawed team. They're not elite yet by any means, but I think that was a good win the other night. They have a really explosive offense. Good balance with the run and the pass. Their defense gives up a lot of yards, but they were able to get a lot of takeaways the other night. Actually, they lead the Big 12 in takeaways at this point, and that can cover up a lot of blemishes on your defense. So at this point, I'd say Oklahoma State, but I think you've got a mix of teams that can contend for that third best spot. I think Missouri is one of them. Texas, obviously, they've had some issues lately, but it's still Texas. Kansas State is playing well, and they're undefeated still at this point. And I think you throw A&M there; they're at least good offensively. And look out, but Baylor's 4-1 right now.
Mm-hmm.
They just trounced Kansas. So if their quarterback Robert Griffin stays healthy, they can pull off some more upsets, I think, in the Big 12 too, and make things a little more interesting down the South.
I still think at the end it'll be Texas. I think they're clearly, of that bunch, is the most talented team.
Yeah, most talented. They just don't seem to have any kind of identity like we were kind of talking with Colorado. They just don't know what to do on offense at this point.
There's a kind of interesting theory that I heard Blair Kirkhoff of the Kansas City Star talk about on the radio, that Texas has become in the high school ranks, has become such a spread offense area that, even though Texas gets the pick of the litter of the players, they're not getting real physical linemen anymore. That how can Texas not just be able to run the ball over people, but they really can't.
Yeah, and they haven't had a great running back there in the last couple of years, and
That's
really they haven't
Jamal
had
Charles,
and they haven't had great wide receivers. Yeah, Jordan Shipley was really good, but other than that, they don't have a dynamic receiver right now. A good quarterback, but he doesn't have a whole lot to throw to.
All right, lastly, I think we have a viewer mail question.
We've got one question here from Ken Hutton, and this is via Twitter. How do you feel about Colorado fans rushing the field after beating one-win Georgia on Saturday? Well, that's kind of what Colorado does. They rush the field. They do it about once a year. They don't get a lot of opportunities to do that. They did it in 2008 when they beat West Virginia. 2007, they beat Oklahoma. And did the same thing. It's really not much of an atmosphere at Colorado home games, but they do have kind of a raucous student section for whatever reason. So that's their thing. That's what they do.
I guess if nobody's getting hurt, it's no big deal. It's just their idea of a good time. I think a lot of people would say kind of an act like you've been there before situation. You're beating a one-win team.
Right, and a team that struggled this year. But, it's an SEC team. They don't beat very many of them. They don't in the non-conference for Colorado, so let them have their fun.
All right. Well, join us next week when we will talk about the Colorado game and look forward to Missouri's first venture outside the state of Missouri when they will travel to Texas A&M.